everybody. Over the course of the past few weeks, we've been talking about the Simic Terror deck. We've done a deck tech where we've talked about the overall strategy of the deck, card choices in the deck, how to play the deck. We've done a sideboard guide where we talked about how to sideboard with the deck against the top 10 most popular decks in Standard. We have looked at flex slots and different builds of the deck, and we've looked at nuances and interesting play patterns with the deck. And so, here's a deep dive of all of those things combined. Enjoy. So this is Simic Crab. Now what this deck is attempting to do is fill their graveyard as fast as possible with as many instants and sorceries as possible so they can cast Tolarian Terror and Eddy Merc Crab for very, very cheap, trigger up the Beanstalk a bunch to draw a bunch of cards, and tempo your opponent out while swinging for a lot every turn. What's cool as well is this deck acts as sort of a self-bounce deck as well. Playing this town ain't big enough because it triggers up the Beanstalk. Also allows us to get creatures out of the way while returning things like Up the Beanstalk and Stormchaser's Talent and stuff like that to our hand so that we can then replay it. That being said, let's go through the cards. First off, Rona's Vortex. This is a newer addition to the deck. It's return target creature or planeswalker you don't control to its owner's hand. And if the spell is kicked, put that permanent on the bottom of his owner's library instead. Now notice that the kicker is black. So yes, this is a Simic deck. It's actually started splashing black. We're playing some Gloomlake Verges over islands. And then in the sideboard, we have some more black cards we'd bring in alongside a swamp that we can grab with Analyze the Pollen and Bushwhack to become a pretty interesting Sultai deck. The thing about Rona's Vortex versus Unsummon is it needs to be your opponent's creature or planeswalker, while Unsummon can protect your own stuff, which is pretty important because we don't have a ton of threats in our deck. But for 4 mana, Rona's Vortex turns into not only getting something out of the way, but getting rid of it, and that's really good. We're paying for Sleight of Hand. Look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, the other in the bottom of your library. It's just a 1 mana spell. That's an instant sorcery that can enter the graveyard and give us that card selection that this deck really, really needs. Seed of Hope is sort of like another Sleight of Hand. Mill 2 cards, you may put a permanent card from among the milled cards into your hand, and then you gain 2 life. This is actually better than Sleight of Hand in this deck because it puts Seed of Hope in our graveyard, possibly putting an additional instant sorcery in our graveyard, and then we get to select a permanent if we want to, and our permanents are our threats, you know, that's important. Plus gaining 2 life and it being an instant is non-zero as well. We're playing 4 Stormchaser's Talent. Stormchaser's Talent is a pretty beautiful card for this deck. It's level 1, creating a 1/1 blue-red otter creature token with prowess, and really what we can do is keep returning Stormchaser's Talent and getting stuff out of the way with this town ain't big enough, replaying it, and getting another otter with prowess, and we're casting so many instants and sorceries, that's just ridiculous. We level it up for 4 mana to return a instant sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, so whether we're still digging for stuff, we need an unsummon, or this town ain't big enough, it's great. And then it's level 3, which happens pretty rarely, but does happen because you draw so many cards, so we're able to hit our land drops. We're playing 6 mana. You may cast whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell, create a 1/1 blue-red auto creature token with prowess. So it's like a big end game, but really you're probably only going to do the first level, possibly level 2 if the game goes a little long. And then again, level 3 is super, super rare, but this is one of our threats and one of the best cards in our deck. We're playing 2 Unsummon, again, splitting with Rona's Vortex, mostly to get things out of the way, but also Unsummon is able to protect your creatures from removal spells because, again, we don't have a ton of threats, so it's important to protect them. We're playing 2 Analyze the Pollen and grab a basic land card, which is important for fixing our mana, especially since we have that sideboard swamp. And we can collect Evidence 8 to instead search for a creature or land card, which is really good since we bring in a couple 1-of creatures in the sideboard, but also it allows us to grab our threats, which is really important. Bushwhack is a fun card where we can search a library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle, which means, again, we can play less lands. We can fix our mana, but also you can have target creature you control fight target creature you do not control. So it's a decent removal spell as well because our creatures end up being pretty big, whether it be the Prowess creature or Tolarian Terror or Eddy Merc Crab. We're talking about Seed of Hope. So Cash Grab is another instant, which is really sweet because we get to leave mana up all the time. Mill 4 cards, put a permanent card from among the mill cards you milled this way into your hand. If you control a squirrel or return a squirrel card to your hand this way, create a food token. Now the squirrel thing just isn't gonna happen. However, it allows us to dig for Up the Beanstalk or our threats and Stormchaser's Talent or Eddy Merc Crab Tolarian Terror. And puts instant sorcery cards in our graveyard, which is what we're attempting to do. Up the Beanstalk, one of my favorite cards of all time. It's a 2-mana enchantment. When Up the Beanstalk enters, and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, draw a card. So it replaces itself when you play it. It is a permanent, so you can grab it with Seed of Hope and Cash Grab. And then it allows us to draw a card whenever we cast This Town Ain't Big Enough or our threats. Speaking of This Town Ain't Big Enough, it's a 5 mana instant. However, it costs 3 less if you target a permanent you control, which we're going to be doing most of the time. Return up to 2 target non-land permanents to their owner's hands. Most of the time, we're going to be using This Town Ain't Big Enough to just like return Storm Chaser's Talent, get something our opponent controls out of the way, replay Storm Chaser's Talent. However, I've seen Simic players tap 5 mana and just get 2 things out of the way. I've seen Simic players protect their own creature with this. I've seen Simic players return up the Beanstalk so that they can redraw. So there's a lot of things you can do with This Town Ain't Big Enough, but really don't be afraid to target your own creatures and spend 2 mana on it. And then really the payoff cards on your deck. Tolarian Terror is a 7 mana 5/5 with the ward 2, and it costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. So our goal is by turn 3, really, we should be casting this for 1. And then we're playing Eddie Mert Crab, which is 7 mana as well. However, double blue has a similar thing. Costs 1 less for each instant sorcery card in your graveyard. Enters tapped, it's not your turn. However, when it enters, you can tap up to 2 target creatures. So between This Town Ain't Big Enough, between Eddie Mert Crab, Bushwhack, Unsummon, Rona's Vortex, we're just getting things out of the way as we jam for a lot of damage all at once. And really, like, having a Tolarian Terror out, end step Eddie Mert Crab, tap down your 2 creatures, untap, jam for 10 is super powerful, especially since the following turn you can like fight something or just unsummon like something. It's just so good. So again, we're trying to fill our graveyard as fast as possible, play these powerful threats, and then just get things out of the way and try to win in just an attack or 2. Now, as far as the sideboard goes, I want to start with the Swamp. If we sideboard in any of these black cards, which often we're going to do together, we're going to bring in the Swamp and take out a island. And then we can grab that Swamp with Analyze the Pollen or Bushwhack. And really, we're going to be digging with like Cash Grab and Seed of Hope. And then we can also hit the Gloomwraith Verge to be able to hit our black source, to be able to cast the black spells that we bring in. Shrouded Shepherd, we are never going to cast the white side. However, it is technically a permanent, so we can grab it with Seed of Hope and Cash Grab. And it's technically a creature, so we can grab with Analyze the Pollen as well, so that we can cleave shadows. In its adventure, creatures your opponent control get -1/-1 until end of turn. Very strong against a lot of the aggressive strategies, especially the Convoke strategies. That just happens to be a quote-unquote permanent. Minor Misstep, very good against the aggressive stuff. Also really good in like mirror-esque matches. Negate is great against dozens of cards. I don't think I have to go through all of them. Tishana's Tidebinder, good again against dozens of cards from like Zur and the Overlords to Temporary Lockdown or whatever. Anoint with Affliction, having this exile effect, exile target creatures, mana value 3 or less, is very strong because it's able to hit Heartfire Hero without you being dealt damage. It's also very good against Enduring Innocence and things like that. And it's also just like a decent removal spell besides that. Go for the Throat is a pretty unconditional removal against decks we need a bunch of removal against. And then Nowhere to Run's kind of a fun card where it's conditional because it only gives -3/-3. However, we can return it with This Town Ain't Big Enough so that we can keep replaying it. So it's very good in a deck like this, similar to the Dimir and Esper self-bounce decks. We're playing a single Pick Your Poison. Each opponent sacrifices a artifact of their choice, or each opponent sacrifices an enchantment of their choice, or each opponent sacrifices a creature with flying of their choice. Very good against the enchantment decks, really, is what we're playing it for. We're playing 2 Tear of Sunder, mostly for artifact or enchantment hate. However, we can side in that Swamp to exile target non-land permanent instead. So against decks that we really think we're going to have to grind against, I'm thinking like black-green or something like that, it's decent to be able to just spend 4 mana and destroy a permanent, or exile a permanent rather. We're playing Keen-Eyed Curator as graveyard hate. Exile a card from a graveyard for 1 mana. It's a 2/2 for, or excuse me, it's a 3/3 for 2. And as long as there are 4 or more card types among cards exiled with Keen-Eyed Curator, gets +4/+4 and trample, so it can become a pretty nasty threat and a decent mana dump. And we're playing the Swarm Weaver, which again is a permanent we can grab with Seed of Hope and Cash Grab, and a creature we can grab and Analyze the Pollen. And when Swarm Weaver enters, create 2 1/1 black and green insect creature tokens with flying. And with Delirium, and we can pretty easily get Delirium, as long as there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, insects and spiders you control get +1/+1 and have Death Touch. This is just a great mid-rangey card when we need more threats, and something we can bounce with Unsummon and This Town Ain't Big Enough pretty easily. So this is a Simic Crab deck. As far as the sideboard goes, you're going to notice something weird. We're playing some black cards. The reason we can play black cards is, 1, we can play Gloomlake Verge instead of Islands in this deck. So we have some black mana anyway. And then we can side in the Swamp, which we can grab with Analyze the Pollen or Bushwhack. So really we have 4 10, 11 black sources, but also we can grab it when we mill cards with Seed of Hope and Cash Grab. So it's pretty easy to grab these black mana. And it shores up some aggro matchups, which is really important. Now, as far as the sideboard goes, we're playing Shrouded Shepherd. The reason we're playing Shrouded Shepherd is we're never going to cast the white side, but it's a permanent that we can grab with Analyze the Pollen, Seed of Hope, and Cash Grab to then be able to Cleave of Shadows, which is the adventure side of it, to have creatures your opponent control get -2, -1, -1 till end of turn. Very good against different aggressive strategies. Minor Misstep, again, pretty solid against aggressive strategies or really like pseudo mirror matches. Negate, good against dozens of cards and decks. They can't really talk about all of them, similar with Tishana's Tidebinder. Anoint with Affliction, very good against these aggressive decks, especially good against Heartfire Hero because it exiles without being dealt, and get rid of it without you being dealt damage. Also very good against like Enduring Innocence. Go for the Throat is reasonable unconditional removal. Nowhere to Run is pretty fun against these aggressive decks because we can also like bounce it back to our hand if we keep any amount of this tiny big enough in. Picker Poison, very good against mostly enchantments, also artifacts, and very rarely flying creatures. There aren't that many in the format we care about. Terra Sunder is great against artifacts and enchantments as well. However, we can bring it in alongside our swamp to beat these decks that are just going to go along with us and we need to answer cards like Shield Raid or whatever. Keen-Eye Curator is an awesome graveyard hit card. It's a 2-mana 3/3. As long as there are 4 or more card types among cards exiled with Keen-Eye Curator, it gets +4/+4 and has trample. You can pay 1 mana to exile target card from a graveyard. And then we have the Swarm Weaver, which is a 4-mana 2/3. When it enters, create 2 1/1 black and green insect creature tokens with flying. As Delirium, as long as there are 4 more card types among cards in your graveyard, insects and spiders you control get +1/+1 and have Death Touch. So it's really easy to have Delirium. And if we're self-bouncing a whole bunch, either with Unsummon or this tiny big enough or whatever, replaying Swarm Weaver over and over is just very, very powerful and allows us to go super, super, super wide. That being said, the most popular deck in Standard is the Esper Self-Bounce deck. Against Esper Self-Bounce, I like Minor Misstep because it counters Storm Teacher's Talent, Hopeless Nightmare, and Nurturing Pixie, Optimistic Scavenger, all that stuff. Negate's also decent because if we can counter this tiny big enough, that's like real bad for our opponent. We're also going to be siding in these black cards and Shrouded Shepherd and the Swarm Weaver. Going really wide is really strong against the Esper deck, especially cards that like don't like to be bounced to your hand. And creatures your opponent control get -1/-1 mean that it's a clean answer to things like Nurturing Pixie and Optimistic Scavenger, sometimes Mockingbird, and then also sometimes the Otter, which means we're also going to be bringing in the Swamp, which means we're going to be bringing out an island. We're not going to be looking to unsummon any cards here. And so we're going to bring out those unsummon Rona's Vortex. And so that's how I'm going to sideboard against the Esper Self-Bounce deck. And while we're here, I kind of want to talk about the Dimir Self-Bounce deck as well. I don't think Shrouded Shepherd is as good, so we're not going to be sideboarding that in. So we're just going to keep in Arona's Vortex. The Dimir Self-Bounce deck is the 3rd most popular deck, so this high sideboard against that. That being said, the 2nd most popular deck is the Gruul Aggro deck. This is alongside the Gruul Prowess deck in 6th most popular and the Mono Red Prowess deck in the 9th most popular. We're going to sideboard the same against all of those. Where Minor Misstep is super-duper good. Anoint with Affliction is great. Go for the Throat is great. Nowhere to Run is absolutely great. Swarm Weaver is really good because we can block so much. And that also means we need to bring in our Swamp. We're going to be siding out of Up the Beanstalk. We do not care at all about card advantage. And then we're going to be shaving on this tiny big enough. We get to keep 1 in, which is nice because we can just like do cute stuff with Nowhere to Run. But this tiny big enough just really isn't good in the sense that like we don't have time to do the cute things by bouncing our stuff or whatever. So this high sideboard against those 3 red aggro decks. So moving on to the 4th most popular deck is Golgari Midrange. Against the Golgari Midrange deck, we're bringing in these black cards as well. Anoint with Affliction and Go for the Throat, both very powerful cards against this deck. Also means we're bringing in the Swamp. Swarm Weaver is a great mid-range card. And I'm actually a fan of Terra Sunder, just for casting it for 4 mana to get rid of big things like Shield Raid. We're going to be sideboarding out of Seed of Hope and Unsummon. Please. There we go. And Unsummon. We're not good at playing the mid-range game with them. We just need to be beating them as fast as possible. And Cash Grab is better at milling our stuff. Removing stuff with Bushwhack is nice. We can't take out any Bushwhack or Analyze the Pollen because we need to grab those swamps. And so being able to outcard them with Up the Beanstalk and this town ain't big enough shenanigans is how we beat them. So that's how I'm going to sideboard against Golgari Midrange. The 5th most popular deck is the Dimir Midrange deck. Against Dimir Midrange, I'm loving these cards that can answer their stuff. Negate is absolutely excellent as well. Swarm Reaver, very, very good. Also, Shrouded Shepherd dealing with like Fairy Mastermind and Floodpits Drowner and stuff like that is like really cute as well. Also means we need to bring in our Swamp. And Bounce is just generally really bad against Dimir midrange because they can just replay it. So we're bringing out the Rona's Vortex, we're bringing out the Unsummons, and then we're bringing out This Town Ain't Big Enough. I think we can only bring out 3. Nope, okay, bring out 4. So it's on a sideboard against Dimir midrange. We've already talked about Gruul Prowess, which is the 6th most popular deck. So the 7th most popular deck is Domain. Against Domain, we are bringing in the Negates, very, very good against like almost everything in the deck. Tishada's Tidebinders, excellent as well. Picker Poison, very, very good. Terra Sunder, very, very good. And we're going to be siding out of Bushwhack. We don't really need to fix our mana because we're not bringing the Swamp in and stuff, and we're not going to be able to fight and kill stuff profitably. And we're going to be bringing out 2 Up the Beanstalk. We're not looking to go long. We're looking to just beat them. So I sideboard against Domain. The 8th most popular deck is Jeskai Convoke. Against Jeskai Convoke, Minor Misstep is super, super good. Shrouded Shepherd, obviously, super, super good. And then we're bringing in all this removal suite. Also, Tishana's Tidebinder is kind of cute against like Knight Errant and Imidane's Recruiter and stuff. And Swarm Reaver, just more blockers, which also means we need to bring in the Swamp. Bringing out the Island of the Beanstalk is really bad. We just don't have time to do shenanigan-y stuff. And thus we kind of need to cut this town ain't big enough stuff as well. We can play straight up against this deck. This is our sideboard against the Jeskai Convoke deck. The 9th most popular deck is Mono Red Prowess, which we already talked about, which brings us to the 10th most popular deck, which is the Azorius Oculus Azorius Tempo deck. Minor Misstep, very good against this deck. So is Negate, it just counters almost everything in the deck. And then we're going to be bringing in some of this block removal. Nowhere to Run doesn't really beat anything. Picker Poison is absolutely excellent. Keen-Eyed Curator is excellent. Since we're bringing black anyway, we're bringing in the Swarm Weaver, and then we're bringing in the Swamp. Now, we're not looking to grind against this deck, so I'm not a fan of Up the Beanstalk. It's another one of those decks that we're looking to get their few creatures out of the way and just like jam in as hard as we can. We're not really going to be fighting their creatures as well, so we're going to be taking out some Bushwhack. Then we're just going to shave on a Seed of Hope. So this is how I sideboard against Azorius Oculus. See, these are the non-flex slots in Simic Crab. If you're playing this deck, you're pretty much bought into playing these 57 cards in the main deck and these 6 cards in the sideboard. Now, if you want to check out, these non-flex cards, please be sure to pause this video and check it out. But we have to decide what to play in these 3 cards in the main deck and these 9 slots in the sideboard. Well, these are your options. So you're going to select, basically the main deck, you're missing which unsummon effect do you want to play. You're going to pick 3 of these and then pick from these 18 cards in the sideboard, you're going to pick 9. So let's talk about these choices. So these are all effectively unsummon effects. We're already playing 2 Rona's Vortex in the main deck. And the reason we play this card is because we can kick it for 4 mana and indefinitely get rid of stuff. It gets things out of the way, but the issue with Rona's Vortex is it doesn't hit our own creatures, and that's an issue because we don't have a lot of threats, so we really need to be able to protect ourselves. There's a similar issue with Into the Floodmaw. However, it can hit non-land permanents, so if we're worried about things that are not creatures, Into the Floodmaw seems pretty good. And then Unsummon doesn't have those cool things. It is only creatures, so it's not like Into the Floodmaw. It doesn't get rid of things indefinitely like Rona's Vortex. However, it can hit our own creatures so we can protect ourselves. So you're going to select 3 of these to add to your main deck. And then as far as the sideboard goes, it gets a little bit more complex. We have 9 slots, and our options are Shrouded Shepherd, and we will not be casting the white side at all. Don't even think about it. However, it is technically a permanent, so we can grab it with Seed of Hope and Cash Grab and things like that. So we can cast this Adventure side, which is Cleave Shadows, which is creatures your opponent control get -1/-1 until end of turn. Very good against some aggressive decks, specifically Convoke. I'm really attracted to this card for, so it's kind of a cool option. Minor Misstep, very good against a lot of aggressive decks. Really good against, the Dimir decks, the Esper Bounce deck, and things like that. Negate, there are dozens of things that it could be good against. Anoint with Affliction is a fun card, exiling something mana value 3 or less. Deals with white enduring creature, but really we're playing it for the aggressive decks because it deals with Heartfire Hero without being dealt damage from it. Gulf of the Throat is a pretty unconditional removal. Picker Poison is Artifact Enchantment Hate. The Flyer Hate, I guess, is fine, but I don't really see it anymore with the 6/6 demon not really being played. Herbology Instructor is kind of an interesting card. On the front side, when it enters, you gain 3 life, and it's a 1/3. So gain 3 life, and it's a blocker, and then we can flip it to have it transform into Malady Invoker. Target creature an opponent controls gets -X, or -0/-X till end of turn, where X is Malady Invoker's power. So this is really good against these aggressive decks if you happen to be losing to them a lot, because it gains 3 life, it's a decent blocker, and then it flips and kills something, and it's a good blocker as well. You're rarely going to flip it, though, against these aggressive decks. Pop Patch Formation, great enchantment hate. Also, being able to just cash it in is really nice. Keen Egg Curator would be decent graveyard hate, exiling a card from a graveyard. Obstinate Baloth is really, really good against the bounce decks, because if they play, especially on turn 1, if they play Hopeless Nightmare, we just put Obstinate Baloth on the battlefield. Also fine against the aggro decks as well. The Swarm Reaver creates a lot of blockers. When it enters, create 2 1/1 black and green insect creature tokens with flying, and if we have Delirium, they get +1/+1. What's kind of fun about this as well is if we can bounce it a whole bunch of times, then we keep creating blockers. This is really good against decks that we want a lot of blockers, or we need to go super wide against. And the Ghost Vacuum, just alternative graveyard hate, not on a creature, so it's a little bit harder to answer. So you're going to select 9 of these 18 cards, and you're going to select 3 of these 6 cards to add to your non-flex slots in the main deck, and then you have your very own Simic Terror, Simic Crab deck, but stock. So let's start with the goal of the deck. Now, really what you're trying to do, the primary game plan, is jam in for 1 or 2 absolutely massive swings by playing a Tolarian Terror or 2, playing Crab on end step to tap something down, untapping, and then jamming for 10, 15, sometimes 20, between all the 5/5s you have and bouncing your opponent's creatures and things like that. This isn't really a nickel and dime deck, though we do have a nickel and dime game plan, in the Otter and Storm Chaser's talent. Which brings us to my other nuance and play patterns. Remember that there is a loop with This Town Ain't Big Enough and Storm Chaser's talent. It's pretty mana intensive, so it's only really good against decks that have already dealt with your primary game plan, or you're going really, really long with. But Storm Chaser's talent makes an Otter. If you play This Town Ain't Big Enough to bounce Storm Chaser's talent or other stuff, or This Town Ain't Big Enough in the graveyard, cool. We can then level up Storm Chaser's talent to grab This Town Ain't Big Enough from the graveyard, and then cast This Town Ain't Big Enough again to return Storm Chaser's talent and either another thing of ours or a blocker. Replay Storm Chaser's talent, get an Otter. Level up Storm Chaser's talent, get the thing back. Play This Town Ain't Big Enough to return Storm Chaser's talent, reset it, etc., etc. This also profits additional cards if you have Up the Beanstalk on the battlefield, because it triggers every time you cast This Town Ain't Big Enough, even though it's only for 2 mana. And so it's a great way to get back into the game, and it's a great mana dump as well. I feel like it goes without saying, but some people don't know, Unsummon isn't just for your opponent's creatures. In fact, you're going to be using it more to protect your own creatures. You don't have that many threats. You just have the Otter, you just have Tolarian Terror, and you have Eddie Merc Crab, and Eddie Merc Crab is really easy to get rid of. So when you cast Unsummon, sometimes it's to get things out of the way, but very often it's to return your own creature back to your hand because it's so cheap. So you can replay it and effectively negate a removal spell. Though if you're doing something like that in Tolarian Terror, which by the way, you can do it with This Town Ain't Big Enough as well, make sure the ward trigger resolves first so that your opponent is forced to pay extra mana. Because if you just unsummon your own creature, or This Town Ain't Big Enough your own creature in response to a removal spell, they just won't pay ward and they have that mana to do other things with. And lastly, remember that you can bounce your Eddie Merc Crab and then replay it to get the tap ability, especially since most of our bounce things, or actually all of them, are instant speed. So we can, on our opponent's end step, if we don't have a removal spell, we could This Town Ain't Big Enough our own Crab, if we have 4 mana, and then replay the Crab, tap something down, untap swing. It's pretty powerful. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social media. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.